Hello, hello, honeys, and welcome back. If you recall, a few episodes back, I mentioned that I'd moved recently for a new job, so here's a little update in case you were interested. First week went very well. Of course, there were some didactic things, paperwork, IT training, whatnot, but I got to spend most of my second shift doing hands-on work, so hooray. But seeing as it has been negative temperatures, or darn near negative temperatures, during this whole time I've been here, I'm very grateful that my winter clothes, my warmest stuff, arrived not too long ago. Our headlines today are chock full of follow-ups, institutional and legal stories, sales, auctions, events, all our typical categories, so let's go ahead and get started. First up, we learned that the Noguchi Museum workers have voted unanimously to unionize. Workers of the museum, located in New York City, have officially unionized following a unanimous National Labor Relations Board, or NLRB, election. The announcement was made on the union's Instagram on January 13th, and the news hit mainstream media a few days later. The new union agreement will represent approximately 55 of the 72 museum employees and is organized with the United Auto Workers Local 2110 chapter. 2110 already covers employees at art institutions in the area, including the Guggenheim Museum and the Whitney Museum of American Art. The new union said it will negotiate, quote, for a more equitable, inclusive, and transparent workplace, end quote. All the more that museum spokespeople were willing to say in statements to our sources is, quote, the Noguchi Museum acknowledges and respects our staff's decision to unionize. We look forward to working constructively and openly with Local 2110, end quote. But they declined to comment further. And following up on the LA wildfires, a few more headlines emerged in the arts news world this last week. Between our last Beesness and now, or Friday night, the Getty Center once again found itself in the path of destruction as the Palisades fire spread. At the time our source article for this particular headline came out, that fire had been burning for a week and continued to eat up over 23,000 acres, or 93 square kilometers, from the sea to the mountains, damaging or destroying some 5,000 structures, and as of Tuesday morning was only 17% contained. Its confirmed death toll stands at 8. Also, as of Tuesday. Yet Catherine E. Fleming, president and chief executive of the J. Paul Getty Trust, explained that it is too complicated to move such valuable artworks around even under the best of circumstances, so the last thing that they would have tried to do here was move them out en masse on such a tight schedule. Instead, she explained, the Getty relies on its design choices, such as fire-resistant travertine stone terraces, which create space between the landscape and the building, the choice of minimal landscaping, which reduces essentially kindling, and reinforced concrete or fire-protected steel walls within the building. So even though potential damage to the Getty's art collections has been something of a reality these past couple of weeks, it is a mitigated risk for sure. We also learned that Frieze is reassessing, sources say, whether to go ahead with its February Fair edition, which typically takes place in Los Angeles, largely concerned with the hundreds of thousands displaced and potential strains on already severely damaged infrastructure. Yet again, we continue to see hope, resilience, and a bit of good news among these headlines. First, we saw an announcement that a handful of arts organizations have launched a $12 million art fund for LA artists that have been affected by the fires. A group of over 40 in total arts institutions, foundations, and donors have launched this multi-million-dollar and growing relief fund for those affected by the LA fires. It has been titled the Los Angeles Arts Community Fire Relief Fund. The fund was officially announced Wednesday, January 15th, with applications opening Monday, January 20th, and more info to come. It will serve artists and cultural workers of all disciplines through emergency grants administered by the nonprofit Center for Cultural Innovation. This headline is significant in and of itself, but also we noticed that the donor side is already pretty impressive. It includes the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, Helen Frankenthaler Foundation, and Ford Foundation, the Getty and LACMA, and big-name commercial galleries, including Gagosian and Hauser & Wirth. So a truly collaborative-seeming effort here, and one that is hopefully going to do a lot of good. We also saw headlines drawing attention to the fact that multiple victims of the LA fires who are artists or studios or galleries are launching artwork sales and raffles with proceeds from these efforts going towards impacted individuals. Mutual mutual aid networks, and national organizations such as the American Red Cross. In other words, go look at some art and happy hunting. Our last follow-up of the day, LA art dealer Doug Christmas was sentenced to 2 years in prison last week. Christmas, now an 80-year-old, has been a prominent dealer in the area since the 1970s and 80s. He is known for showcasing artists such as Robert Irwin, Donald Judd, but even back in 1979, Andy Warhol was writing in his diaries that there were instances of non-payment for sold artworks in what some now see as foreshadowing to how the dealer's legacy would become tarnished by, quote, decades of financial disputes and a barrage of lawsuits from artists and creditors, end quote, say our sources. Yet Christmas retains a base of loyal supporters, particularly among older collectors in LA, even now. Still, he was convicted last May on 3 counts of embezzling funds from his gallery's bankruptcy estate, says the New York Times. He was sentenced last week to 24 months in federal prison, where he must report on February 17th to begin that sentence. Civil judgments against Christmas for issues including the embezzling were first brought forth in 2022 by the bankruptcy trustee Sam Leslie, but sentencing was delayed all this time as the defense sought probation based on Christmas's advanced age, while federal prosecutors argued for a harsher sentence on the grounds of the dealer's, quote, pattern of financial misconduct resulting in millions of dollars in losses, end quote, says our sources. Eventually, though, U.S. bankruptcy judge Robert Kwan reached that 2-year decision. He described the embezzlement of $264,000 US as the tip of the iceberg, estimating that the total misappropriate funds were over $14 million US. Kwan went on to say that such misconduct caused, quote, great intangible harm, end quote, to the integrity of the bankruptcy system and dragged out litigation for creditors. I mean, boo-hoo for the creditors, but sad for the artists who were affected by the embezzling. Really only one sale-related headline this week, that a Chelsea building filled with galleries and artist studios is soon to hit the market at $170 million. The building in question is the West Chelsea building, a 400,000 square foot one finished in 1910 and occupying a large chunk of the block between 10th and 11th Avenues. The galleries and studio spaces are currently occupying parts of the ground and 8th floors. The foundation administrating the use of these spaces was established by the married couple Gloria and Raymond Naftali in 1993 with the intention of creating a vibrant artist community via inexpensive studio space. The current tenant directory lists 207 entities representing galleries as well as artists like Jacqueline Humphreys, Rachel Harrison, Tony Coates, Alex Israel, and Walter Price. Here's the thing. Gloria Naftali died in 2022 at the age of 96, 19 years after her husband, and left many of her assets to the Raymond and Gloria Naftali Foundation, a nonprofit she'd established back in 2008. Her will was confirmed by our sources to read in part, quote, it is my wish, but I impose no legal obligation that the foundation maintains the character and use, primarily for artists, studios, and galleries, of the building, ... end quote. Our sources have already found the West Chelsea building listed for sale at $170 million by the brokerage firm Colliers, if it's French. Then dozens of tenants gathered at an artists-organized West Chelsea building tenants committee with 3 representatives of the foundation to discuss the, quote, deep concern among us about the future of our community, the dedicated staff, and the livelihoods we've built here, end quote. Prior to the meeting, in their letter invitation to tenants, the organizers wrote, quote, as discussions have intensified, we believe it's time to come together and organize as a collective, end quote. The letter appeared to indicate that frustrations are so high because tenants did not only learn about this potential sale through the media instead of by the building's owners, they also believe it is not so impossible to make sure that the building remains available to them at below market real estate rates, as Naftali would have wanted. So we're seeing a difference of opinion here between legacy on the artist side and the organizational side. An attorney for Naftali's estate named Derek Woolman confirmed that the foundation did hire a firm to market the building for sale and said that the building's sale is necessary for operational and tax reasons as it isn't generating enough income for the foundation to maintain it. He went on to say that any proceeds from the sale will go to Naftali's favorite causes, which range from supporting artists to preserving the memory of the Holocaust. As Woolman said, Raymond himself was a Holocaust survivor. He's quoted as saying, "This is a major piece of real estate and it's not going to sell in one day. We are hopeful we we can find someone who will keep the character of the building as an artist building and a gallery building, end quote. With the new year, a whole lot of people seem to be getting new jobs. Let's take a look at some of the major announcements of CEOs, directors, and whatnot from the arts world last week. Christie's Auction House appointed a new CEO. Billionaire owner of the company, Francois Pinault, promoted Bonnie Brennan, 51, who joined Christie's in 2012 from within to succeed Guillaume Cerruti on the latter's recommendation. Brennan has served in various leadership roles while rising through the ranks. Since 2021, she's been the president of the Americas division, which accounted for 48% of all auction sales in 2024. Brennan said during a press conference that as CEO, she will, quote, oversee Christie's 1,600 employees and focus on innovation while preserving the company's heritage, end quote. She is replacing Guillaume Cerruti, 58, who'd served as the company's CEO for 8 years. Christie's press release clarified that he will become the president of the Pinault collection and serve as a Christie's chairman. Brennan will take the reins from him on February 1st. This headline stood out to me, honeys, because Brennan will be only the second woman to lead the auction house, following Patricia Barbizet, who held the role from 2014 to 2016. San Francisco's Asian Art Museum also appointed a new director and CEO. Their selection was Jakarta-born scholar Soo-young Lee, whose appointment ends its year-long international search for a new leader. Since 2018, Lee has served as the Landon and Lavinia Clay Chief Curator at the Harvard Art Museums, guiding its artistic vision and leading its training program. Prior to that, Lee spent 15 years at the Met as its first-ever curator of Korean art. She's expected to begin her new role in April and will be replacing Jay Shu, who has led the institution since 2008 and was the first Chinese American to serve as a director at a major U.S. art museum. Zhu announced his retirement plans for this year back in 2023. Lee stated she hopes to foster a similar sense of inclusion at the San Francisco Museum as she did at Harvard. She told the San Francisco Chronicle, quote, San Francisco and the larger Bay Area is an important hub globally for all things Asian. I'm thrilled to be embedded in the institution whose compelling collections and stories I've followed for decades, end quote. Along with setting a September opening, the new Calder Gardens have also named a curatorial leader. The still in progress $58 million U.S. grounds in Philadelphia is being built to honor modern sculptor Alexander Calder, who lived 1898 to 1976. According to the New York Times, this plot of land is along Philadelphia's Benjamin Franklin Parkway, which is already home to several museums. Along with an 18,000 square foot shed-style building designed by Pritzker Prize-winning architects Herzog and de Meuron, it will feature landscaping by Piet Oldhoff, the man behind the grass and wildflower plantings on New York's High Line. The exhibition space and gardens will mainly host works by Calder to begin with the expectation to expand later. Bogota-born Juana Berrio has taken on the inaugural Marcia Perelman Senior Director of Programs job. She is currently the curatorial and sustainability advisor to the Independent Study Program at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York. She will transition roles January 21st. The step makes sense to her as prior to the Whitney role, she was an associate director of residencies and curator of public programs at Amont in Brooklyn. Further intrigue surrounds Munich's Gallery Thomas after it came under criminal investigation last week. The blue chip firm founded 60 years ago is now the subject of a said criminal investigation after a shocking bankruptcy filing in the German city on July 16th of this year. The announcement came as a surprise to the art world, given the gallery's decades-long record of presenting major exhibitions as well as regularly participating in prestigious international art fairs like TIFAF and Art Basel. The gallery's specialties range from German Expressionism and Bauhaus to European modernism and contemporary art, showing the likes of Joseph Beuys and Max Ernst. Munich newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung quoted the attorney named as overseer of the proceedings, Hubert Amferl, saying at the time that they would look for someone to take over the gallery, would assess what claims may be in place for works of art it holds, some it owns, some are on consignment after all, but that the gallery was expected to continue operating as usual for the time being in the days after the bankruptcy filing. But early warning signs this year came up. Sources told ArtNet News that something seemed off even last month when the gallery did not participate in the most recent edition of Art Basel held in Switzerland, which brings us to last week's frustratingly limited and still breaking, even in some ways, headlines that Munich prosecutors confirmed probes into the gallery and its directors Raymond Thomas and his daughter Silke Thomas for alleged insult insolvency delays, fraud, and breach of trust. We'll keep you updated, honeys. A bit of good news from last week, the National Endowment for the Arts has announced $36.8 million in funding to be distributed nationwide. On January 14th, it announced the first round of NEA fiscal year 2025 awards. This is typical as the bulk of the agency's grants are announced in the spring, often January and May. As our sources note, last year, the NEA and its sister agency, the National Endowment for the Humanities, survived Republican-led proposed budget cuts with a final allocation totaling $32 million. The NEA's announcement also comes days before the second inauguration of Trump, who in his first term categorized NEA and the NEH as, quote, wasteful and unnecessary funding, end quote. NEA funding will be distributed through 1,474 awards to support the arts across all 50 states, Puerto Rico, and D.C. NEA Chair Maria Rosario Jackson said in a press release that, quote, creative projects receiving funding this year will explore new ways to integrate arts and culture into communities, end quote. And the monetary awards span categories like grants for arts projects, Challenge America, research grants in the arts, and literature fellowships. Many of them aim to empower organizations and individuals to enrich their communities through creativity. We love their continued support of the arts and humanities. We also heard last week about a 400-year-old cache of treasure that was found hidden inside a leg in a statue in a German church. Workers restoring the St. Andreas Church in Eisleben, Germany, found quite the surprise: 4 bags stuffed with 816 coins dated back to the 1600s inside the leg of a sandstone statue. The experts who went on to examine these findings believe the trove was hidden away during the 30 Years' War when the Swedish soldiers of the time would have been plundering the region. The war, lasting 1618 through 1648, was a devastating conflict that tore through much of Europe, particularly German territories, and Eisleben was not exempt from this widespread destruction and social, political, economic turmoil. Among the findings were a rare golden angel gold coin, gold ducats, various silver coins, and hundreds of pennies. Though all this was discovered back in 2022, the announcement was only made last week once detailed examinations and documentation were completed. This find is important as it speaks to the strain of the economic times. Experts believe the loss of this coin hoard would have been near devastating, as it was likely a church fund meant to cover pensions and medical expenses for priests and theologians in the town. And more than that, the statue is located inside the very same church where the Protestant reformer Martin Luther preached and initially wrote his 95 Theses critiquing the Roman Catholic Church back in 1517. It was also the place Luther delivered his last sermons in 1546. The church continued to have a storied history after that, clearly. A bit of a holiday announcement: a San Francisco museum, we heard, is set to display a Martin Luther King Jr. sculpture for the first time in 40 years. It will be shown at the Fine Arts Museums of San Fran, which encompass the Legion of Honor and the DeYoung Museums. They acquired the bronze portrait by Elizabeth Catlett, a pioneering Black modernist who lived in New York and Mexico, for display in the American galleries of the DeYoung beginning Saturday, January 18th. The relatively public display was installed just in time for MLK Jr. Day holiday weekend, honoring the American civil rights leader. The work is simply titled Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and was made for a 1984 through 85 competition led by the National Endowment for the Arts. It was one of 3 finalists in the nationwide competition, trying to create the first portrait of an African American in the federal building, a sculptural tribute to King for the U.S. Capitol. Distinguished senior curator Timothy Anglin Burgard believes that among reasons her work wasn't chosen was controversy, frankly, surrounding Catlett's renunciation of her American citizenship during the 1950s communist investigations and her longtime residency in Mexico. Yet the piece went on to have its own fascinating story. It was purchased for the Fine Arts Museums of San Fran via Cleveland dealer David Lusenhop from the collection of the late Reverend Douglas E. Moore and his wife, Doris Hughes Moore. Doris was the first Black woman to earn a doctorate of veterinary medicine from Purdue University, a classmate of King's at Boston University in the early 1950s, and an organizer of one of the earliest civil rights sit-ins. They'd bought the piece after it was determined not to be the finalist. Burgard and Edna Root, curator in charge of American art at the museums, told the San Francisco Chronicle, quote, Catlett exaggerated his features slightly to convey the strength and purposefulness of a man depicted near the end of his life, with the creases and sagging flesh of a man who has lived through difficult and frustrating experiences, end quote. And our last story for the day, honeys, David Lynch, the uncanny film director, has died at age 78. Lynch's death comes after last year's announcement that he'd been diagnosed with emphysema and was unable to work or leave his house. His passing was confirmed by his family on Facebook on January 16th. The multi-hyphenate film director and artist is best known for his cult and more traditional classics from Blue Velvet of 1986 to Mulholland Drive of 2001. Some even consider him an institution unto himself, one of cinema, painting, music, photography, and pop entertainment in general, according to our sources. In spite of Lynch's compromised health, initial responses to the news of his death have overall been sentiments of shock. Write our sources, quote, "His departure leaves a void as uncanny as any one of the many unsettling scenes in Twin Peaks, Lynch's television debut," end quote. And with that, honeys, we wrap things up for the week. I hope you are taking care, staying warm, all that good stuff. Talk soon, hydrate or dihydrate, and take care. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugnout. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.